You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
It's not true. That's impossible.
Greetings, younglings, and welcome to Making Tracks Reaction Chat, brought to you by those fine lads and lasses over at fanfortracks.com. Part 5, I should say, of Ahsoka dropped earlier this week, and this week's episode was called Shadow Warrior, directed by Dave Filoni, written by Dave Filoni, and executive produced by Dave Filoni. It actually has a 9.4 score on IMDb, so again, it's another highly rated episode received by not only the fans, but also the critics alike. If you remember, on Part 4, Ahsoka faced up against Shin Hati, Marek was slain, Sabine was coerced to join forces with Bale and Skull and relinquish a map to him so that they could then take the big jump. Ahsoka fell off a cliff and we don't know where she's gone. Hera made a breakaway from the council after not being granted leave to go and support Sabine and Ahsoka, took Jason and Chopper, as well as a number of X-Wings over to the planet to then witness the jump of the Eye of Sion into the second galaxy. Joining me this week, as always, a man from parts unknown, Mr. Mark Newbold. So, Mark, initial thoughts on Shadow Warrior?
First things first, all the props and all the pats on the back to Hayden Christensen for coming back as Anakin so freaking brilliantly, because we saw him in Obi-Wan and it was great. No doubt, it was great. It was great to hear his voice in Rise of Skywalker. It was great to get those moments in Obi-Wan Kenobi. One scene, obviously, in particular, when we flash back to the Clone Wars. But this, even though it's in the world between worlds, even though it's not reality as we know it, it is Hayden in a variety of guises of Anakin. Just to see him in that role, invested, looking $1 million. We were back in 2005. It was Revenge of the Sith again. It had that intensity.
Yeah.
I absolutely loved it. Now, whether or not it progresses the plot to the degree that maybe you would anticipate such a highly rated, highly regarded episode does, I don't know. I think maybe it's motivating Ahsoka in a different way. Yeah, we'll get into it. But I was very, very pleased with this episode. What about you, mate?
I was kind of like thinking to myself, give Hayden Christensen a live-action Star Wars show. And this isn't a criticism on George and his script and his direct of the prequels, but there was something about the way that Hayden was delivering those lines that was a lot more lively, a lot more fun. I mean, obviously, I think, you could kind of say, whereas he had said in the prequels that he was kind of channeling the delivery of James Earl Jones, this felt like almost he was channeling the delivery of Matt Lanter. I mean, he didn't sound like he was mimicking, but it was that slightly more Anakin Skywalker in his prime, doing stuff that he likes, which is basically kicking ass in the middle of a war, in the midst of it, just dragging, you could always say, a young Ahsoka Tano around with him. This is one of these episodes whereby I think it's unpacking a lot of the emotion and a lot of the weight and the guilt that Ahsoka has carried around with her for years. We're talking about an Ahsoka now, 30 plus years on from the Clone Wars. And I think the reason why, like we've said before, that she was very standoffish. She didn't feel like the warmth and the bubbliness of the Ahsoka that we knew from Rebels and Clone Wars. But I feel like the last bit of the puzzle that you kind of go, right, she's kind of almost now got some kind of absolution from herself. And whatever's been blocking her and keeping her from really embracing herself is now kind of free. And obviously, we know it's very clear from previous conversations and interviews that Dave Filoni is a big Lord of the Rings fan. You can't but help draw comparisons between Ahsoka the Grey and now Ahsoka the White. And in fact, everybody's calling her Ahsoka the White. What basically happened with Gandalf in the end of the Fellowship of the Ring and his return in Two Towers, going from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White. Already even at the end of that episode, we start to see Ahsoka almost loosening up a little bit. Suddenly it's like, don't have a plan, let's see where it goes. We're going into the mouth of like the belly of a beast and see where it takes us. So you are very much right, sir. I'm not 100% sure how much it really drives the actual story along, other than the fact that now she is in pursuit of Morgan Elsbeth and Sabine. We assume that they're going to end up at the same spot in the galaxy, because wouldn't that be a kicker if one actually ended up at the other side of the galaxy to the other?
In Obi-Wan, there's still just enough of a sliver 10 years before A New Hope of Anakin left within the shell of Vader that when Ben is kind of torturing himself, Anakin can basically say, what little tiny slivers left of Anakin can basically say, this wasn't you, this was me. It's my fault that this happened. It's not your fault that this happened. And so at least then Anakin and Ben, or Vader and Ben, can then take their beef, if you want to call it that, which happens in A New Hope, to a different level in the sense that it's brass tacks now. We're down to the nuts and bolts of the mechanics of the situation. It's still personal. It's still master and apprentice. But there's an absolution that happens in Obi-Wan. Here, with Anakin in the world between worlds and Ahsoka, and is it, like you say, what kind of corporeal existence are we talking about? Is it a Force Ghost level? Is it a dream? Where has she gone? We don't really know, and I guess we don't really need to know. You know, she appears in the water, she's rescued. It's kind of irrelevant. She's been torturing herself. She's been standoffish. It does explain things, i.e., why she forced Sabine away. It was Ahsoka that pushed Sabine away. It's usually the apprentice that leaves the master, not the other way around. So now we know a little bit more about why Ahsoka's done what she's done, wired the way she's wired. Even when she's on the wing of the ship with the Purgle talking to Hyang, she's more loose. There's a smile on her face. Let's just punch hyperdrive and see where it takes us. She doesn't know. She's chancing her hand a little bit. She's leaving it up to fate a little bit. She's probably spent 30 years trying to plot and plan every little detail of her life because she was the apprentice, the Padawan of the Chosen One, who ultimately sided with the ultimate bad guy the galaxy's ever seen to take over the galaxy. There's going to be guilt because she was the one that walked away in that scenario.
Exactly.
Here, she's on the other side of the coin. She's watched Sabine walk away. So she's seeing all the angles of relationships and master and apprentice, Padawan, and it doesn't progress the plot hardly at all. Hera's got her issues with the New Republic. There's the Mothma scene. She's obviously not got the stroke she used to have in terms of being able to give people permissions and latitude. It's a different scenario. But in terms of Ahsoka, I think it's a personal leap that's been made because people are complaining that, you know, oh, Ahsoka's just, you know, in the Clone Wars, she was fun and flippant and snippy and snappy and Sky Guy and yada, yada, yada. And you made a great point about Hayden as much honouring. And I think it's respecting the material, which I found really impressive. He's clearly watched and listened to Matt Lanter's interpretation of Anakin and taken it on board, not just, I would imagine, under the direction of Filoni saying, could you kind of do this so people think that's what Matt did in the Clone Wars? And this is just my personal opinion. I think Hayden's probably sat down and watched a whole bunch of episodes thinking this version of Anakin, the short hair, the chest plate, the purple robes that we see him in, Clone Wars movie era Anakin after episode 2, that is Matt Lanter's Anakin. So if I want to personify that, I need to forget the James Earl Jones stuff. I need to think, what did Matt do? And it felt to me like he'd really taken that on board. If that's the case, hats off, because I thought that was a great thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of meta, isn't it, when you think about it? It's Hayden Christensen channeling Matt Lanter, who's channeling Hayden Christensen.
That's a good point.
I mean, my take on the setting anyway, I don't think she's gone anywhere. She's literally just floating in the water. What we're seeing is either a fully subconscious dialogue within herself, or at the very most, it will be some kind of force-driven vision. I don't think she's gone anywhere. And I think literally the world between world is just a manifestation. It's just a setting that, in her mind, allows Anakin to come back and for her to start going through this process of mindfulness and kind of like understanding Obi-Wan and like his failure to stop Anakin, you could say. It's Ahsoka's failure for not being there. But again, it's, you know, it's for the weight and it's the body count of the galaxy on both of their shoulders. And it's interesting because it's kind of affected them in different ways, but very similar. And then jumping 35 years into the future, you then actually got the culmination. Basically, you've then got Luke Skywalker, who's doing exactly the same as Ahsoka and exactly the same as Obi-Wan at the same time. And he shuts himself away and he shuts himself down. So I find this very interesting, and it's tone poems and it's, you know, there's lots of mirrors.
Yeah.
And I love this episode because that kind of mirroring. And also I like the fact that, like, when we go to the Clone Wars, actually, when we kind of get dragged back into time to what we assume is a battle of Christophsis. It's very similar kind of light in this pink kind of
that era,
like haze and stuff. I like the fact that it's still kind of vague, but it's abstract enough. Again, the second time when we jump a little bit further into the future and you see like it's the Battle of Ryloth, it's like you only know that if you know Clone Wars because you can spot a couple of Twi'leks. I quite liked it because for me, it jumped straight to that conversation that George Lucas had with Alan Dean Foster when they're talking about Splinter of the Mind's Eye and like if they don't have any budget, how are they going to shoot it? Let's just shoot it all in fog. And I kind of thought that was quite nice actually. And I was like, maybe I just spunked their budget on like the previous episode or the rest of the series. I don't know. It kind of kept it very abstract, and because like you're not focusing too much on everything, there's so much eye candy in that anyway. Like you've got all these live action clones, all these live action phase 1 clones that we've never seen before actually in live action, actual physical ones, not just CG ones that we saw in Attack of the Clones. That was really cool. There's lots of things that fans of different eras of Star Wars can really, I think, grab hold of in this episode without it feeling like you're kind of being beaten over the head with like Easter eggs and fan service kind of moments. I mean, there's a couple. I think the Rex thing was probably a bit of a fan service moment, but then also it's logical. Wherever Anakin went, Rex went. And wherever Anakin went, Ahsoka went. Kind of makes a little bit of sense.
I'm Gareth Edwards, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks Radio.
Obviously, the comparison of Luke and Ben felt like he had to pay penance, so Ben goes to Tatooine in isolation. Yoda, the same, goes to Dagobah in isolation. Luke goes to Acto in isolation. They're monks. They're in solitary, in isolation, they're away from everything else. Ahsoka's a Ronin. Ahsoka's in isolation. When Sabine says, "What, you're still on this ship?" "Yeah, it serves my purpose. I travel." So Ahsoka's a Ronin. So there is a difference between what she's done, because I think Yoda never walked away from the Order. Ben never walked away from the Order. Luke never had an order. He tried to start an order and it didn't work. So he never walked away from the Order. It was destroyed the same way that they sacked the Temple, Order 66 to 501st, all of that stuff. But Ahsoka walked. She's Grasshopper in Kung Fu. She's out there in the galaxy. That's an interesting thought. I've never correlated the four of them now, their scenarios across different sort of time periods. Ben has a purpose, of course. He's there to watch over Luke. But other than what we see him do in Obi-Wan and possibly does in the second season, that's their fate, if you like. But Ahsoka's different. So I think now she's kind of unlocked. I don't know if this is actually the world between worlds. Part of me thinks that she hit that water with such a thump, it knocked her silly. I know people are going to say, "Oh, surely she'd have drowned, blah, blah, blah." Kit Fisto could swim underwater. I don't know what her physiology is. She might be able to hold her breath for 2 hours for all we know. We don't know. She may be using the Force when she's asleep.
I mean, we saw Princess Leia out in space. No different, really, than somebody underwater. If you try and pin it down too much, I think it will start to fall apart a little bit. And I think it works on the same level as the Mortis arc. You just kind of accept it that it's something out of time after the events were all slightly changed for whatever happened. But it's exciting. It's a bit like the lizard up the nose in the Boba Fett series with Boba Fett. It's like that's kind of like almost like that threshold moment. He's then changed and becomes one with the clan, and that's it. And in a similar kind of way, she is now unlocked. And I think she admits in part 1, or at least suggests that she didn't use the light side really to kind of tease out information from Morgan Elsbeth. So up until this part, very much you could say, and I hate using the grey Jedi term, she's dabbling with shadow, but mainly sticking to the light. And I think from now on, she's going to be very much more on the light. And I think that in itself will make her able to best Baylan Skoll when she next meets him.
Because we know Filoni loves his Lord of the Rings, that there's a Galadriel comparison as well, because Galadriel is tempted by the ring. You see, Frodo sees the vision of Galadriel with the ring. She knows it would be the most terrible thing if she had that ring in her possession. And in the World Between Worlds, when Anakin and Ahsoka clash, and it's just to say, the choreography, the fighting was fantastic. And nobody swings a blade and looks like they want to chop you into bits like Hayden does. So I loved all of that. The moment when you see Ahsoka, when she's got the blade to Anakin, she just gets the moment on him, and you see the eyes go red, her eyes go red. And that's when Anakin takes the step back. That's what she could be if she turned to the dark side. And it's all about lessons. It's probably going on in her mind. I'd love for Filoni to confirm one way or the other if it is or it isn't. I'm perfectly happy for it to be either. And here we are in a world where you've got episodes like this in Ahsoka, the Force, the good side, the dark side, characters from the past all coming together. And then the bricks and mortar, nuts and bolts, politics of the galaxy in Andor, and then whatever we're going to get in Bad Batch Season 3, which is going to be more of that kind of clone action, all existing in the same universe, essentially, and all working. What a time to be a fan.
It's all Star Wars, and at no point have I seen anything from any series where I've gone, that's not Star Wars, but yet they're different strands. I mean, it's a bit like the books in some respects. Like, you can quite easily read a Timothy Zahn novel and you get something completely different to a Adam Christopher novel or Claudia Gray novel. They're all slightly different because they've got different voices behind them. And so obviously with this one, it's very much does feel like Rebels season 4.5 or 5 or whatever. But probably after this episode, I'm hoping anyway, it's going to start to feel much more like just the Ahsoka series rather than hangover from previous stuff. And I think that's where I think the stuff between Hera and Chancellor Mon Mothma, I think that's where it's going to be interesting, because this is where, again, we could kind of get those vibes of Andor with the whole politics.
Would you welcome that in this scenario?
I think so. I think you need something to anchor it a little bit, because otherwise I think this could potentially end up being a little bit too fantastical, and it might start to push even what we consider is Star Wars fantasy. And I mean, for me, it's great because obviously we see X-Wing pilots and all that stuff. So
of course,
that's fun. We've heard about how the New Republic was as inefficient as the Old Republic. I'm not necessarily saying corrupt, but potentially, yes, we've already seen there's some levels of corruption or levels of loyalty to the old Emperor's New Order that is causing things to be very difficult and to slow down the process. Hera is battling against is definitely evident of that. Really, if it was down to just Mon Mothma, I think she probably would just take Hera on face value, having had a relationship and they've built up trust over the years. But obviously it's this committee, and of course whenever you have a committee and an oversight committee especially, it's like they're going to want to do anything but act, because all they're going to want to do is nitpick it apart and really probably cover their own asses as well, make sure that nothing can come back and bite them in the arse. So I think it's going to be interesting just to see, like, again, like how far Hera can kind of push stuff, and does it get to a point whereby she walks away like Leia does 30 years later, maybe kind of goes, right, if Thrawn comes back into this galaxy, I'm going to take him on even if you guys aren't.
Also, you are looking at a scenario where they're being very naive's not the word. I mean, they're being optimistic. They think they've defeated the Empire. They know there's pockets out there, but it's not threat level 1 or anything like that.
No.
We know later in the timeline that members of the Imperial Remnant end up on the Republic Senate, and they try and bring them in and work with them. Clearly, it doesn't work, but it does also feel, as much as we're looking back to Clone Wars, especially in this episode, and we've been calling it Rebel Season 5 forever and a day, but also they're casting out threads, like you say, into the future. All these moments of this new Republic isn't up to it. They're not seeing that there's a major threat. Hera is being proactive, whereas the Republic will have to be reactive because they just don't see the threat. And so that does very much feel like the seeds of what will become the Resistance. Leia gets a mention in this episode, which was very cool.
Yeah.
You know, so I just wonder where, I don't think we'll see her. We may hear her on the comm, but I don't think we'll see her. Maybe see a hologram that's enough to evoke the character. But, you know, Leia's in the world, she's in that realm. I just wonder how far down that road, because you mentioned Adam Christopher, perfect author to mention with Shadow of the Sith, all the work that he did in that, which is kind of halfway between trilogies, leading up to Exegol, setting the scene. You wonder when Thrawn, whether we're just seeing like Luke at the end of Force Awakens, or whether he's in the last episode, or how they play it. Maybe he turns up on Wednesday. I don't know what his game plan is, because his loyalty is to the Chiss. So if he's in that other galaxy, is he under different directives? Has he changed his MO? Is he doing something different? Is he still focused on that? Or is he part of a bigger master plan? Is this where Snoke comes in? It's open skies for what they could do, because ultimately we're moving forward to the timeline, and got to think the goal is that sort of Force Awakens era when the First Order come back.
Don't necessarily say set up the First Order, but at least create another stepping stone towards the First Order. I don't necessarily think that beyond maybe something like we've kind of seen with Moff Gideon and what he's doing. Got a Shadow Council going on and Project Necromancer. Now, we can assume that is to do with cloning of the Emperor, but it's been left very vague. And I like that, because I think that means that Dave and John aren't ready to commit, because I think the moment you commit, obviously that means you kind of set certain characters down a certain path that's going to make it very difficult to then walk back. You keep it vague at this point because you still got 30 years. That's like a hell of a lot of time. You think about, you know, how long the Empire was actually in existence for. That's pretty much like that, isn't it? It's, you know,
longer. Yeah,
exactly. My mind is that whatever happens in this series, that Thrawn needs to be, by the end of this series, back in our galaxy, as it were, back in
Yes.
the main galaxy. And I think it has to have done something to show what a substantial threat he is. And I think that film back there, like Filoni's going to do, is basically going to be that. And hopefully, I would very much like to see the death of Grand Admiral Thrawn and make it permanent. There are some characters I'm really starting to wish would die and just stay dead, just to create a little bit more creative space so somebody else could step in to it rather than rely on them.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Jason Sandula. I thought it was very interesting because I thought this episode was very well balanced, how everybody, even Chopper to an extent, everybody kind of gets their moment. Jason being able to hear the lightsabers, not necessarily sure whether or not Hera was kind of humoring him or if she actually heard them too, but she obviously believes in her son enough to then obviously send the X-Wings back out to continue his search. His character has got some very strong potential to obviously be a main character going forward, and possibly even is the Jedi that Ahsoka does train. We see that Sabine kind of goes, give a lightsaber to Ezra, I'll put the Mando helmet back on. Ahsoka, if you want to train the kid. I think he's got some serious force potential. And actually, we kind of get that proper name check of Kanan Jarrus. Everybody knows who his dad is, even if you've not seen Rebels. But we didn't dwell on it too much. And I quite liked that conversation between Jason and Hu Yang, where, can you train me? No. Can you show me how to build lightsabers? No. Which is, of course, what Hu Yang's been doing for like 10,000 years. It's like teaching kids to build lightsabers. So I think that was quite cool. So I'm hoping actually he's gonna feature more as we go in. I've heard a lot of people online going, oh, he's got to go to Luke's Academy, so he's going to end up dead. Well, Luke's Academy gets burned down, I reckon. Not that, I'd say probably maybe 10 years, before The Force Awakens, give or take. So if Jason goes to our Academy, in theory, you'd kind of like to think he would have graduated and be long gone by the time Kylo comes along and burns the place down.
There's a moment where Anakin says to Ahsoka and I'm waggling the air quotes, great for podcasting, the world between, thank you, the world between worlds realm, or however we're framing it. Did you even want a Padawan? I mean, this version of Anakin, if it's in Ahsoka's mind, he would know everything Ahsoka knows. There's moments within the earlier scenes with Ariana Greenblatt, who, by the way, was fantastic, and what a year she's having as young Ahsoka. It's kind of quizzing him and question, how do you know that? And so on and so forth. But nevertheless, the thoughts out there now is like, would you want a Padawan? And I just wonder, we saw in Book of Boba Fett when Ahsoka was at Luke's Academy as it's being built, there to guide, there to help. And then off she goes, the Ronin that she is, she's away again. And I wonder whether or not she wants to train somebody. She's seen the dangers of training. She walked away from her training. Why would somebody not walk away from hers? Somebody's already walked away from her training. It was Sabine. So I don't know whether she wants to be that person, but when she reunites with Jason, when it's clear that he's shown quite considerable talent, if he's picking up on what we think he's picking up, which probably does lead us to think it probably is the world between worlds, because how would he pick up on a dream in her head? When he reunites with her, Ahsoka the White, it's a refreshed, rejuvenated, new Ahsoka. We've already seen a version of Ahsoka the White, and we're probably putting way too much value in the fact that, hey, she was wearing a grey jacket earlier and now she's wearing a white one. But we saw that in Rebels. We've seen that moment in Rebels. There's a little bit of a mixture there, but the point is, as we go into the whole sequence with the Purgles at the end of the episode, Ahsoka has somewhere inside a switch has been flicked. Now she's ready to, essentially, for lack of a better term, she's ready to go for it.
One small, tiny observation. She mentions Balin's skull and Anakin doesn't react. And I know that Balin knows of Anakin, but you kind of think, well, would Anakin know of Balin? It was also not only the change of costume, but it's the very literal spotlight on her as she gets rescued by the X-Wing pilot. Is, she's bathed in white light, and then when she's in the ship and she's waking up, she's again like very neutral light hitting her, very white. It's almost like that Cloud City neutral white light that you then get for the rest of the episode, where everything's very neutral and it's not too pallid. That planet from what we've seen up to that point, was almost very dark and stormy and moody and kind of like very autumnal. Trees were still red, but the light and the quality of the light up in that cockpit was very white and Bespin like. Every time like I see those Purgles, as much as I love him, I just can't help but hear Scotty, Captain,
There'll be wheels.
and also the whole kind of thing with Spock kind of swimming up into the mind meld. The whole visual that we saw of Anakin cut into Vader and stuff like that.
Oh,
and to find out that that was done live action and actually in camera and not CG, which I thought it was, that was pretty cool. So,
well, I will tell you one thing I found out this week. Interestingly, I spoke to Maria Sandoval, and she informed me that
Evan Whitten,
they didn't dye his hair green. That's done by ILM. Green hair is done post.
Okay, so to me, anyway, that seems like a lot of effort. I mean, there must be a reason for it other than...
The reason was she didn't want to dye a 9-year-old kid's hair green. That's the real reason.
I mean, I could kind of get that. Ahsoka without a headdress. Did that look weird to you? When I first watched it, I was like, she looks odd. And I know it's very difficult, having had costumers do it and trial and error and stuff, trying to hide where the Montrals or the Leku kind of end and the actual skin start and trying to blend all that makeup in. It's very difficult. So hats off to the makeup team. But I was just like, wow, Ahsoka looks weird without a headdress on. Really weird.
It is weird. I think because you get so used to seeing her with the implementation on, and when you saw her as a kid, with the almost like her version of a Padawan braid sort of running down the back.
Exactly.
But it's also a little bit like Bo-Katan without the sort of the head bits that she's got. And I mean, of course, she's human, so that's completely different. But yeah, it was interesting to see her. She did feel, like I say, when she kind of comes to him and she's a little bit delirious before she keeps saying Anakin, and it's obviously very much on her mind. And then when she wakes up in the med bay, like Poang says, like one day later, she's been out of it. And they probably made sure that she was rested and gave her whatever meds that they needed to. So there's probably some reason why she was out for a day. Also, she nearly drowned and she's exhausted. She's just lost a major fight. Yeah. It's a stressful time. So any manner of reasons why she would be out for a day. But yeah, like you say, when she comes round, she does look, quite apart from the headpiece not being on, fresher.
Yeah, refreshed, definitely.
Refreshed, not that she had, because as you say, you mentioned the makeup and it's flawless. She was worn down, like bags under her eyes. She didn't, but that was kind of the tone that you were getting. When she wakes up, it's almost like, again, not a lot happens plot-wise. They've jumped in the mouth of the squid space whales with hyperdrives up their arseholes, and they jumped into the other galaxy. Really, that's the only thing that's happening.
Yeah. Well, in some respects, it's a bit like Part 3. They fly to the planet. What that's doing is it gives the characters time to breathe a little bit. And in this case, developing and grow and have a load of weight taken off of them.
If you can get eight episodes in this, it's like playing Grand Theft Auto and just driving around the streets of Vice City because you just like driving around, don't you? You want to be in the world.
Exactly.
Hello, I'm Dennis Lawson, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
So in your mind, do you feel that maybe this is a slightly wasted opportunity for an episode? Or do you think trust that Dave and that know what they're doing in terms of the pacing of this series? Because swings and roundabouts, the action is good. The lightsaber duel was amazing. And it was great seeing Hayden still able to pull off some of those moves that he did back in 2004, 2005. And I think it's really nice that they've considered a lightsaber duel rather than just kind of, I just swing some lightsabers. And that's with every single lightsaber duel that they've had in this series. It feels like there's like a purpose behind it and a reason, and they've sat down and discussed the actual story beats for that lightsaber duel rather than just smashing each other with LED light sticks. That kind of harkens back to what we saw when we watched those behind the scenes documentaries with Nick Gillard and the Duel of Fates and Battle of the Heroes and stuff like that. Every stroke and every counter stroke and parrying that has a meaning behind it, which is how this is elevating this series. There is the big question of, does this series work if you do not know the Clone Wars and Rebels? Has there been enough explanation and exposition in a useful way for you to really understand and get engaged with the characters? From people I'm speaking to after this episode, they're like, oh, it's really cool seeing the guy who played Darth Vader and Anakin. We didn't know that Ahsoka was his Padawan. And obviously the flippant answer is, oh, well, you should just go and watch the Clone Wars. Go and extend your Disney Plus subscription and watch all of the Clone Wars. But I suppose, is that then going to give any more meaning to that character for the rest of the series for those people. And for us, for people who have seen these series, we will have completely one perspective, and those who haven't will have completely the other perspective, and it will be harder for us who have seen those episodes to be able to just kind of leave it to one side. And I know, like, even when we talked to some of the fanfics on the first reaction chat outside BF5, but it's like, unless you have a mind wipe, you're never going to be able to do it.
It's tricky. I think if you hadn't seen any of Clone Wars or Rebels and were really not clued up at all to the relationship and the scenarios that happened in those shows, it's too late now. If you started watching Ahsoka, you might as well just carry on blindly. They didn't lie. That's not fair. They weren't entirely transparent, let's say, in the sense that you really did need to have some knowledge of Rebels and you did need to have some knowledge of the Clone Wars. And we've said this before, Marvel do this nice, they're sort of Marvel Legends type things they do when they give you a recap of certain scenarios going into films. And they did throw something out on Disney Plus this week on Wednesday that kind of gave you a bit of a sense of what had happened in the past. But we're mid-season now. This all needed to happen before the show. And I think maybe their attitude is, well, you know, there's 7 seasons there waiting on Disney Plus. You can watch them if you want. No one is going to do that kind of homework before they watch an 8-episode series. So it's tricky. I mean, for fans who are invested, I watched the Clone Wars as they came out. I've seen certain episodes more than once, but most episodes I've probably just seen the once. I've got enough of a working knowledge and I'm in and around it every day that if there's something I don't know, I know where to look to find it. We know we can go to Wikipedia, or we know we can watch Star Wars Explained, or whatever, anything. There's places to go to find out that information. If you've forgotten stuff or certain things come up that you can't quite remember. But if you're just a casual viewer and one of the lines in the first episode is, "For Ezra," who the hell is Ezra? Why should I care about him? I don't know who he is. I've never met him. I'm not invested in Ezra.
To be honest, even me, right now, I don't know why I should be invested in Ezra. Really, in the grand scheme of things, he's a potential Jedi, yes. He almost was the linchpin for a rebellion around Lothal. That's 2 really important things. However, again, those are kind of things that they're scattered into the first episode. But if you're still getting your head around what you're seeing and stuff, and Clancy Brown's in it and all that, you're going to miss the fact that they really hang on the fact, you know, he was from Lothal and stuff like that. But it'll be interesting to see how many people who haven't seen these kind of go, right, after Ahsoka, I need to go back and watch Rebels or rewatch Clone Wars or watch Clone Wars and then stick with it. You're more likely to go and watch Screen Crush's 126 episodes of Rebels in 26 minutes kind of recap.
Yes.
And kind of the fact that there are people who've done all the legwork for those people is quite helpful. However, it's still not going to get quite the same thing, because like that whole thing on Moraband, like that Ahsoka versus Vader fight that they had at the end, was it season 2 of Rebels? I mean, that was one of the most emotional moments in animation. That, and obviously Ahsoka deciding to leave the Jedi. I also think in some respects it's pretty brave to hang so much on stuff that potentially a lot of people haven't seen. And, you know, even for the Star Wars fandom, that's not a huge amount of people, really. When you're in the fandom, day in, day out, talking about it, it's very easy. I suppose a casual fan, it'd be interesting to see if how the numbers are working. Obviously, the big push this week was Anakin. I think you're going to get a lot of people just tuning in just to kind of like see what's going to go on and see if it's going to be Darth Vader and stuff like that. Ratings are ratings at the end of the day. I think at this point, we should leave it here.
If you want to be part of the action, visit fanthatracks.com or be sure to comment, like and share on our social media feeds at Fanthatracks. Send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. Subscribe, leave a review, preferably a 5-star one, on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Temple for composing the Fanthatracks intro, Anna O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Tune in to Good Morning Tatooine. It's live Sunday evenings, 9 o'clock UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, on Facebook, YouTube and Twitch. And check out our Fanthatracks Radio Friday night rotation every Friday at 7 o'clock UK time for new episodes of The Phantom from Down Under, Planet Leia, Desert Planet Discs, Start Your Engines, Collecting Tracks, Cannon Fodder, and special episodes of Making Tracks, and every Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time for your weekly episode of Making Tracks. And remember, Fanthatracks.com, our social media feeds, Fanthatracks TV and Fanthatracks Radio are absolutely free. So no Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, Kickstarter or Indiegogo required to stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news.
Join us Tuesday for Making Tracks. If you can't be bothered and just want to hear us on reaction chats, then catch up with us for part 6. But until then, stay safe, take care, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fanthatracks Radio, it's another episode of Making Tracks.